Help me welcome Sam and Victoria.
Alrighty then.
I was hoping to call this, I'm so old, I was hoping to call this Lessons in Building Across the Centuries. I started my first company literally last century, so I'm the curmudgeon on today's agenda.
And it's so funny because, or particularly one of the things that I really want to talk about is, so, everyone's probably read your background here, but I think I've got a little nuggets here and there that maybe they didn't know, which was that you went to the Illinois Math and Science Academy, IMSA. And so I'm curious to know, being from a math and science background, was that where you found your love for finance and building and operating businesses, or how did that transition start for you?
No, I didn't really have any entrepreneurial background or interest prior to really being intrigued by the internet, Web1, which is funny to even have to enumerate the webs. But I was in college, I graduated in 1999, so I was in college really at a very special time in the history of the internet when things were, we weren't the pioneers of 1993, but we were still early on and pre-bubble, really figuring out what we were trying to build. In terms of the entrepreneurial itch, I was born to two, my parents are both immigrants. And I think, although they never said the word entrepreneur, I really think immigration is in many ways the ultimate entrepreneurship in terms of really putting everything on the line for, some vision of the world 10, 20 years out that you see that maybe others around you don't see. And so I think my parents had a comfort with risk and failure and getting back up again that I think was just imbued in me. So that when turning down a fancy consulting offer to start SparkNotes in 1999 didn't seem at all crazy, despite my classmates in college thinking I was a moron.
And speaking of SparkNotes, and I've been told I can't ask you what is Web3, but one of the questions that I really want to talk about today is, you've built these amazing businesses around Web2, and like you said, SparkNotes, OkCupid, ShopRunner. I'm curious to know, or we didn't build it, but ran and operated it for many years. So when you were operating these businesses in Web2, what were kind of some of those lessons learned, or what were some of the kind of key takeaways that you had from working in these sort of centralized structures?
Yeah, I think if you look at Web1 and Web2, what I found is, in so many cases, while the technology changes, the underlying human need or human engagement doesn't always change. So if you take SparkNotes, which is still to this day, if any of you are in know people in high school or maybe are younger than me, you might have used SparkNotes yourself. SparkNotes is not that crazy. It's not that innovative. We just took CliffsNotes and we put them online, right? So that was we didn't change the way people study. We didn't change, we created a new brand, we created a new business, but the web that technology just enabled a different way for consumers to do what they already wanted, right? And if you think about Tinder being the Web 2 version of Match or OkCupid, yes, the form factor of mobile, the connectivity of Facebook allowed for a different consumer experience. Tinder is on its face very different from Match or OkCupid, but the fundamental consumer need that we served was the same. And so I think that's really what I really try to suss out when I talk to entrepreneurs, or when I look at, think about Web3. It's, okay, what are the technology shifts and what are the either business or consumer shifts? They might be related or they might not be related. And those are where I think sometimes businesses get created that, forget Web3, Web2 businesses got created just because they leveraged Facebook or they leveraged a mobile phone, but they didn't actually add any value, and those businesses tended not to be durable.
And those businesses, because like you said, it's always the concern, especially in entrepreneurship or when you're in VC, is that you don't want to invest in a widget. You want to invest in something that is sustainable and something that's long lasting. Did you ever have sort of concerns, or are there ever any sort of problems that you might be running into when you're looking at founders or looking at organizations where you're kind of how can we sort of pivot or kind of transition from what would maybe be perceived as a widget into something that would be a full-fledged platform or a full-fledged organization?
Well, again, I think there's whatever web you're building on, there's like feature product business. And too often, I think it's very common that founders will build something that is a feature or a product and not a business. And I think one of the things that I really enjoy working with founders is, okay, you have an insight that maybe is a feature. How do you build that into a product and build that into a sustainable business? And ideally, you can use technology as a moat to enable, with Web3, something that Web2 companies can't do, or vice versa. SparkNote's so simple. We simply cut out the royalty distribution to our authors. That was the big moat. It was not even the technology, but we had a business model shift that the technology enabled, that CliffsNotes was unable to compete with. So it can be pretty nuanced, but that's what I'd like to help entrepreneurs really reflect on and dig up and figure out, how do we make this thing protected from the incumbents.
And you don't have to get into this if you want to, but for your own companies, so thinking about Web3 and thinking about sort of that transition, whether it's through decentralized like DAOs or through decentralized work systems, what are some kind of learning lessons or some things that you're taking from your experience working in Web2 and helping to kind of prepare, even transition some of your companies to get ready for this wave that's coming with Web3?
So for me, probably the biggest personal challenge in my own growth as a leader, and probably the challenge I most see over my 20 years mentoring entrepreneurs, is the challenge of scaling organizations. And leading a small group of, your early founding team, 10 people, it's very, I wouldn't say it's very easy to lead that group, but the leadership that is required to lead a small founding team is very different from the leadership that it takes to scale an organization and scale a business. One of the challenges with decentralization that I think we are still discovering is, how do you scale that org in a decentralized fashion? How does leadership scale? These are the things I really like to think about. Technology is a part of that, but also humans are a part of that. And we all still, I think, mostly are humans.
Mostly.
Maybe that'll change soon. But there's a company that I'm close to, and they're decentralization maximalists, which is awesome. And my good friend is the head of product there, and she's an awesome product leader. And we were having a drink the other day, and she's like, running product in a Web2 company is really hard. You've got the engineers you've got to coordinate with, you've got the CEO, you got all these things, and arguably running product might be the hardest job in a Web2 company. And she's like, my product roadmap is decentralized. It's like, we've got like all these people who have opinions on the product roadmap. She's like, this is almost impossible, right? Mm-hmm. And so I'm sure we will figure out how to do it. New operating methods will sort of gel. But how do you lead in a highly decentralized way? I think we're still figuring that out. I think this is an open question. And the curmudgeon in me isn't that it's impossible. It's just that I don't think we're talking about it. And I don't think, when I hear a leader saying, oh yeah, well, we're just always going to be decentralized forever, I'm like, okay, possible.
Definitely possible.
Never been done in the history of the world, but that's okay.
We're working on it. What are your, the other thing, I think both you and I would say I'm not a Web3 skeptic, but I'm very much, a lot of my concerns is around privacy and security when it comes to individual data. So I'm curious to know, what's your sort of hot take around Web3 right now?
Hot take. No, I think if I just pick up on what you talked about, data, here's the thing about data, which is like, Target gets breached, Yahoo gets breached. They had like zero user loss. Nobody stopped using Yahoo. I mean, if you were using Yahoo Mail when they got breached, you were still using Yahoo Mail after they got breached, and people still kept shopping Target. So like, for me, I'm all about just like, I can have ideas, but my ideas are probably wrong. So I just like to observe like what humans do. Like four math majors started the best online dating site ever, I would argue. And it's not because we knew anything about dating, for sure. It's because we observed humanity and we built a great product. My wife will attest. So when I look at all of the people focusing on like the data side of this, I just say, well, where's the proof? Where's any smidge of evidence that the median consumer is like worried about her data? So that doesn't mean we can't convince people to worry about their data, but I think if people don't have an appreciation of where the consumer is at, then I think then they're just sort of blinding themselves into like they're drinking the Kool-Aid basically.
Yeah.
And in terms of Web3, I think it's awesome. Like I think when you have these most of innovation in technology is linear, and then you have or continuous, and then you have these step change functions, right? It's like the internet, mobile, Facebook, Web3. And what's awesome about our country and sort of the tech community is everyone is like, all right, we don't have all the answers. Let's just go build and figure shit out, if I'm allowed to say that. And so, so I love that. That is like what is inspiring and energizing. But again, I think we have to be sober and we have to be clear-eyed that like, okay, a lot of this isn't going to work. That's all okay. But we have to like say that out loud, that like a bunch of the stuff that's being built is going to be like pets.com, and like Cosmo.
Wait, what's
like,
pets.com?
A lot of stuff that we tried to do in the 90s didn't work, and a lot of stuff we tried to build, on mobile didn't work. Remember ringtones? Ringtones were multi-billion-dollar businesses. And that's all okay. So I think it's just, we have to have a little bit of sobriety and just say like, we're all figuring this out. We don't have all the answers, but we all have to stand on each other's shoulders. And that's how, that's how innovation moves forward.
Yeah, exactly. And then I guess we've got about, are we doing Q&A after this or like, I don't know, that's a good question.
I'm in charge around here.
Oh, okay, perfect. So, but I guess one of my last questions that I've got with the remaining time that we have is, and we talked about data, we talked about information security. What is the future, or how, if you could kind of envision how, if you can envision how you would like Web3 to be structured, or again, it's this very amalgamous thing that many people are trying to form, and first come, first serve is essentially what's happening right now in this industry. But let's say you had a hand in trying to create the architecture structure around what is going to define Web3 going forward. How would you do that? How would you define it?
I mean, I think, as with every other step change, I would focus on, efficiency, access, and, delighting the customer. I think if you're, if you're using technology to enable access, whether it's, to, financial systems that, a lot of people don't have access to now, whether you're creating efficiency by being able to do things cheaper or faster, or whether you're ultimately delighting an end customer. I think those are the durable advances that you can build permanent, massive product and businesses on. And like the way one of my lenses is if a founder pitches me and they start with the Web3 part, that's usually not the right answer. Start with what is the outcome, what is the customer experiencing, what is the efficiency, and then the last slide in the deck is, oh, it happens to be built on Web3, or it happens to have this component. In the same way that like you don't start by saying, here's the database I'm using. That's never the first slide in the deck, is like, check out this awesome new, MongoDB thing, that I just, I have an instance of, or I'm building this on AWS, oh my God. Like, that's never the first slide in any deck until, and so if it is, I'm like, okay, well, what if Web3, like, as it evolves, like, you don't want to be built just on that technical innovation.
All right, then. So, and I think we've got 5 additional minutes, so want to open up the floor for Q&A, if that's all right. Hi, yes.
What do you think the monetization models of Web3 would look like? A traditional SaaS model, do you think that would extend into Web3?
So the question is around business models, I guess. Look, I think the thing that most excites me about Web3 from a business model perspective is the ability to do frictionless micropayments effectively. Like, I think, back in the 90s, I love saying that, back in the 1900s, we talked a lot about, how to do micropayments. And I remember like Intel and Microsoft formed some like, partnership to like figure out how to do this. And it's just, there's always been this like incredibly high friction to, you can never give someone $1, and arguably like the iPhone ecosystem went a long way toward doing that, right? They made a lot of those transactions easier. They made the consumer part much easier, but they didn't really change too much on the financial cost of it. If I can easily give you a penny, I think SparkNotes would have been a $1 billion company if we could have charged a penny for every SparkNote or whatever, or a penny for every page or something like that. So I think those kinds of business models become really interesting.
All the way in the back.
So my name is Rohan. I'm from Tower Research, and I want to know, do you have a framework for what should remain centralized in Web 2.0 versus what should be decentralized in terms of services and products?
So, should I repeat it?
Sure.
Question is, what should remain centralized versus what should be decentralized in terms of Web3? So, for everyone to hear.
I think the framework, you never want to be a solution in search of a problem. Again, I'm so old. Like, I just think like I lived out of Web3 as much as possible. It's like when I was doing online dating stuff, I always thought, well, how do people date in the real world? And then let's figure out how to like make the online version of that, okay? And so I do the same thing here. It's like last century, if somebody comes to me and says, oh, I've got this like flying toaster, I'd be like, well, do people want flying toasters? Like, you don't look around for that market. So my framework is very simple. It's like, what is broken or inefficient about the way, we live in a pretty good world, right? Like, think about it. I shouldn't say that exactly, but like, we have a lot of our needs are being met, especially in advanced economies. And so like, most things aren't broken. And so if you're gonna go fix something that's actually broken instead of just deciding to like create a parallel universe of things with a different technology stack.
Actually, tapping in on that, do you think you were able to kind of fix some of the problems with modern dating with OkCupid?
For sure, yeah. Like, I think, I could go into I have a whole diatribe on dating, but like, I think one of the most important things we did was, allow people to connect with a more diverse group of people outside of their physical constraints, because typically you're only dating people who are like in your neighborhood or go to the same coffee shop or gym or school or place of worship. I think number two, we enabled people who, I've been told thousands of stories, but I met a woman who was in a terrible marriage with 3 kids, and she's like, I never would have had the confidence to like get a divorce and move on with my life, but for knowing that there was a place I could meet someone online, because I'm not gonna like go to a bar and meet people. So yeah, I think we like totally like enabled a new set of consumer behaviors that that you just could not do offline. And that's the kind of like step change I would encourage people to be looking for.
Nice. We'll go. Well, you've been raising your hand for the longest, so.
So when you're thinking about investing in Web3, how do you know you're not investing in like a Friendster or a MySpace versus a Facebook? How are you, especially since the space is so new, we don't exactly know who's going to execute well or how they're going to execute and what those problems are going to evolve to become. So how are you thinking about that?
That's a great question, and I don't think you know, and I think fundamentally, I would say, and I'm a seed investor. I try to invest as early. I want to be as close to the founder and as close to the founding event as possible. So for me, it's ultimately like team, because it's almost never up and to the right, uniformly. And even when it is, there's a lot of challenges to scale. And so I want to bet on the team that's building and know that like there were things MySpace could have done and Friendster could have done to not get Facebooked. And look, ultimately, you should have been able to make money off of MySpace or Friendster investment anyway. So, and by the way, you also then should have invested in Facebook because you should understand, so you should become a domain expert. So I think you just have to place bets on great teams, solving, adding real value to the world.
Yeah, and I'll also chime in. I haven't been investing nearly as long as you have, but definitely when it comes to what we're looking at on the VC lens, we're always trying to back teams that we believe can actually grow and scale. And with regards to just kind of emerging markets or markets that are up and coming, whether it's looking at TAM or whether it's just kind of looking at kind of the usability of this, is this a need in the market, is what we're always trying to vet for. Like, wants are nice, but needs drive revenue at the end of the day. So, other questions? Yes.
I'm really curious about what you're
Yeah, so like the hottest topic in dating is like dating in the metaverse right now. Like that's like with the thing everyone's trying to figure out, which you know I think will happen for sure. People will date wherever there's human interaction. Like we've been dating since the beginning of time, or we wouldn't all be here. So the question is, how will people be able to engage with others in a romantic context, having a, you know, whatever, in the metaverse? And I think, I haven't fully built a thesis around this, but the number one thing is going to be, you know, what is that engagement? What form does that engagement take, even for non-romantic engagements? Like, where do we go? How are we interacting with people? But once there are standards and scaled communities, I think the dating is going to be will be one of the first monetized use cases, for sure.
Okay, then. Well, Sam, thank you so much for joining me today. Really appreciate it having you.
Thank you.
Thank you.